On Being a Pagan. Alain de Benoist. Translated by John Graham, edited by Greg Johnson. 2004. Originally published in French under the title Comment peut-on, étre, paien? Under the pen name Albin Michel, 1981. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Preface. Stephen Edred Flowers. I first heard the name Alain de Benoist in a side comment made by my dear late Dr. Vader, Edgar Polome, in a lecture on ancient Germanic religion. In our age, dominated as it is by ideologies of various sorts, Benoist is often categorized as a political theorist of the French New Right. Indeed, he is that. But even a brief survey of his writings reveals a thinker with a breadth and depth of intellect and intellectual capacities that far surpass those of the typical theorist of our dreary times. He has written on topics ranging from myth and religion to economics, from folklore to philosophy. In his view, which is difficult to classify as right-wing in any conventional sense, the malady of the West, and more particularly in Benoist's case, the malady of Europe, is a cultural pathology, and not a mere political crisis. He sees the root of this malady as the European adoption of Judeo-Christian monotheism, and the radical cure he proposes is the rejection of that religion. To many who might otherwise agree with much of what Benoist has to say, this solution is unacceptable. However, if he is right, and we believe Chatty is, then his remedy is in fact the only possible one. Anything less than the rejection of Judeo-Christian monotheism, and the redevelopment of our own Indo-European ideology, would simply treat the symptoms of our Western disease, rather than cure it. In this book, Benoist lays some of the foundations for a new pagan philosophy. But before the old edifice can be restored, the ground must be leveled with a series of hammer blows. Benoist must, like Nietzsche, philosophize with a hammer, and tear away the rubble of 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian accretions to European culture. In many respects, the ideology underlying Judeo-Christian monotheism has become secularized. As others have pointed out, Christian ethics and universalism, disengaged from their religious roots, have been used to rationalize the redistribution of wealth, radical individualism, universal political suffrage, and the general eagerness to sacrifice freedom in order to avoid responsibility. Foreword. Of what are those figures in the paintings of Botticelli and Caspar David Friedrich dreaming? What past-present continuum is drawing their gaze? What possible gods might these figures foresee passing through the world that surrounds them and connects them to their own lack of fulfillment? What kind of transcendence will their presence trigger? These questions for me are directly linked to the key question, what does it mean to be a pagan? That I intend to try to answer here. Only yesterday paganism was still a pejorative term. It is now part of everyday speech. Just what does this term mean? What can its intended meaning be for the people of our time? What idea do we propose to make of it? In correlation, what is the basis for this paganism's criticism and refusal of the biblical thought that gave birth to Christianity? And finally, what will the two coexisting phenomena of the collapse of the great revealed religions and the return in strength of the sacred mean to those who inherit our culture? These are not questions that can be regarded with indifference. They are questions of history and destiny. They in fact concern both our destiny and our destination. To know just what our destiny is, beginning with the discovery of whether or not we still desire to be destined for anything. These are the questions I ask myself in this essay, which is primarily a personal reflection, a reflection on a subject that is heartfelt and about which my feelings have evolved, and on which I hope they will continue to evolve. It is a problem of sensibility. There are no absolutes when it comes to criticism. There is no correct point of view about points of view. In any case, I am not seeking to create such a perspective. I have only tried to reveal as clearly as possible two great spiritual visions, two great views of the world that are quite distinct from each other and that often confront one another even in the hearts of the same individuals. I wish to speak about why I spontaneously recognize myself in one and why the other contradicts my inner being. And lastly, how it is possible today to reappropriate the most eternal values. I am therefore not trying to persuade my readers of my views as much as to portray a spiritual antagonism, to illustrate a conflict of sensibilities. One may or may not feel pagan, one may or may not feel at home in a pagan sensibility. The problem remains knowing just what this sensibility is. Everyone is then free to acknowledge and reinforce what seems most personally suitable. This basically amounts to saying that such a book, far from alarming the believers about their chosen faith, may also fortify their belief in it. The illusion can even be positive and can even hold and inspire a creative projective force. I am not aiming at suppressing or reducing faith, but at giving something back to it, perhaps on other levels. Of course, not all beliefs are equal, but there is one thing worse than a vile belief, and that is the total absence of faith. Presuming such a state is possible and isn't, as I guess it might be, a form of radical unbelief, in an earlier essay, I said that the means by which things are made is just as important as the things themselves. We will see that faith, as I view it, is of equal worth with its object. This is another area where I am at odds with most of my contemporaries. Is demonstration of this contention starting from the roots of faith even a possibility? More than 40 years ago, Raymond Aron said that the critique of historical reason determined the limits and not the foundations of historical objectivity. This amounts to saying that a critique can never allow itself to proceed in the absence of a philosophical determination. It is faith that rules the gods and not any kind of science, Max Weber writes. A sentiment is not refutable, yet it just so happens that sentiments determine systems as so many self-justifications. Max Weber provides the example of the Christian maxim, resist not evil. It is clear, he adds, chat from the strictly human point of view, these evangelical precepts praise an ethic that runs counter to dignity. It is up to each of us to choose between the dignity of a religion that offers such an ethic, and the dignity of a virile being who preaches something entirely different, to wit, resist evil, otherwise you are responsible for its victory. According to the profound convictions of every individual, one of these ethics will take on the face of the devil, the other the face of God, and each individual will have to decide which one is God and which one is the devil. This is just how it is on every level of life. If one is bound to such a value, if one decides to assume such a heritage, then in all logic one must uphold such an opinion. But the initial decision remains a matter of choice, a choice that can never completely demonstrate the necessity of its own postulates. Nothing spares us from making this choice, in which our plans and personal ideas play a role, but where shared identities exist as well, what we belong to and what we have inherited intervene. Every one of us will have to decide, which is God and which is the devil. It is in the full awareness of this calling that our human status resides. Subjectivity, therefore, does not have to hide away because it is subjective. In fact, this is precisely where it finds its strength. I offer in this book a parallel reading of paganism, as the original religion of Europe and as an ever-central component of its present day, and biblical and Christian thought. One may accept or reject this reading, it is a subject for debate. But to go even further, if one accepts my course of reasoning, one may even take a stand opposite that of my own, to wit, join Christianity and reject paganism exactly for the same reasons that prompted my attraction to the latter and withdrawal from the former. The discussion is thus posited from the outset not as a dilemma but as a trilemma. It is an approach that is based ultimately upon tolerance. A tolerance that does not exclude judgment or criticism obviously, but only views its adversary as the face of a circumstantial problematic. Someone who denies the existence of worlds beyond, someone who denies any distinction between the individual and the world, who refuses to accept a conception of the deity based on the notion of one truth and the devaluation of the other that results, is ready, today as yesterday, to accept all the gods, even those who are most alien, even those he could never bring himself to worship, even those who have attempted to steal his soul. He is ready to defend the right of people to see themselves in the gods of their choice, on condition, of course, that this right be extended equally back to him. I have written this book, as is my habit, for everyone and no one. Especially for those I will never know. A kind of nostalgia may be detectable here, a nostalgia for the future. The time of the interpretation of myth, alas, is also that of the effacement of the gods. This is an era that is neo-primitive by the very fact of its modernity, profoundly empty by virtue of its excess. This is an era where everything is simulacrum and foreclosed experience, where everything is spectacle but there are no eyes left to see. We live in a society where new forms of totalitarianism and exclusion are being put into place. It is a society with a deafening clamor of rekindled hatreds matched only by the deafening clamor of the inauthentic and the inessential. It is a society where beauty is dying, a society at the end of history, a society of the last man where everything is collapsing into the sunset, of the absolute transatlantic West and a once great history. In opposition to this time and this society, this book seeks to recall the possibility of a landscape and a spiritual representation that would resonate with the beauty of a painting, a face, a harmony, with the face of a people uplifted by hope and the will to live another beginning. This is, obviously, a book of desires, memories, doubts, and passions. A.B.